Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's Manchester Salon discussion. Tonight's Salon discussion is part of, for the first time, the National Science and Engineering Week, which we're very grateful for their contribution in promoting tonight. It comes out of a discussion that we had as part of the Manchester Science Festival last year in October, called Fukushima Fallout, where there seemed to be a little bit of a mismatch between discussion by environmentalists and discussion by nuclear scientists. So today, kind of revisiting the terrain of energy through a focus on the looming energy crisis and looking at how we can engineer a way out of it. Hopefully we're going to be able to bridge the different conversations and the different language that's used by different participants. We've got 3 speakers tonight who are going to introduce for about 8 minutes each their take on the issue of solving the energy crisis and what the political barriers are to doing that. In reverse order, we've got Mike Koefman, or Koefman? Koefman. Mike is the outreach worker for Planet Hydrogen, a Manchester-based NGO which advocates the supplanting of all fossil fuels by hydrogen, produced solely by the electrolysis of water using renewable electricity. Mike undertakes education on climate change with the public, and between 2002 and 2008 ran an evening course at the Friends Meeting House in Manchester. He's also involved with citizens groups, secondary schools and university groups, and enjoys meeting people, discussing matters which are important with them, and listening to what they say. Second will be Lauren Collins, and Lauren represented the UK's Nuclear Institute Young Generation Network at the Middle East North Africa Nuclear Conference held in Dubai, 2011. She was instrumental in setting up the first MENA Nuclear Institute branch, which is now based in the United Arab Emirates. Lauren has presented at the 4th International Symposium on Nuclear Energy, held in Jordan in 2011, covering the increased importance of public engagement and communications in the nuclear industry post-Fukushima. She was also invited to represent young science and technology professionals from the UK as part of the Fulbright Academy of Science and Technology delegation at the 2011 World Science Forum in Budapest. First up, we've got James Woudhuysen. James Woudhuysen's formative years were in the 1960s, as if we can't tell, and early 1970s before the end of the Vietnam War. Inspired by the space race, he wanted to be an astronaut, so decided to read physics at university. James went to Sussex, where he followed his degree with an MA at the Science Policy Research Unit. After that, he pursued journalism before going on to coordinate postgraduate studies at what is now London's University of Arts. James is Professor of Forecasting and Innovation at De Montfort University in Leicester. For more than 20 years, he's consulted for major corporations and for government. So 3 different insights into the issue of the energy crisis and looking at how we can engineer our way out of it. So first off, James.
Well, thanks, Simon. I'm very grateful for everybody coming along tonight. Monday night, very good of you. I think I'm in the forecasting business, which means you can tend to wear clothes like that, les plus forts. And it's a very good idea to think about the future. It's an even better idea to take the lens caps off your binoculars when you do that. And it's led, in my own forecasting about energy, has led me to geothermal engineering, ploughing up Devonshire and Cornwall to get the Earth's crust working for us, and also for Baxi boilers, makes a gas boiler that keeps the lights on as well. And I think that's a good point of departure, because I think if you read Ofgem, if you're a really sad person and you read the Ofgem reports, you'll find that we are facing, because of the closure of old coal and nuclear power stations, important energy shortages, otherwise known as power cuts, in the next 3, 5, 7 or 8 years. And therefore, we do need a solution to this. And I think much of what I want to say is when we're talking energy, we're not really talking about the technicalities. Most of all, we're talking about our assessment of human beings. Now, if you go to China, where I like to go, this is a firm in Hangzhou, makes escalators, make 44 different kinds of escalator, including the sort that gets you shopping even more at the department stores. But the really interesting thing about their website is you look at the yellow button, Contact Now, just down to the bottom left of it there, add to basket. If you want 8 escalators at 25,000 US dollars, click on that. Or if you want 12, click on that. Now, you and I might not like that, but it does speak to an ambition in the world and a new way of doing business, which is very much of a piece with the human ingenuity that I want to praise and uphold tonight. And just in the same way as Einstein revolutionized modern physics and laid the basis for fission power, in a document, if you care to look at it, Does the Inertia of a Body Depend Upon Its Energy Content? It's 690 words long. Right? So all of the academics here, all of the academics anywhere, need to be more ambitious. Shorter papers, more scale, and more willingness to try new things. I think when we're looking at the annual anniversary of Fukushima, the alarmism that even a conservative newspaper, it nearly burnt to bits on my scanner there, gave just 48 hours to avoid another Chernobyl. It's quite remarkable that a chemist such as Angela Merkel can, within 4 months, pass legislation to end nuclear power in Germany. Actually, it's not ending nuclear power in Germany. What it's doing is getting more nuclear power from France and Austria, and then just abdicating moral responsibility. And it's very interesting to see, just the Observer yesterday, they're so hostile to nuclear power, they cannot conceive of the idea that renewable energy, done at scale, in my book that Simon forgot to mention, but I commend to you tonight, done at scale, and renewable energy has some points. If it's a very diffuse source of energy, it therefore needs engineering on a grand scale, and it need not be in conflict with nuclear energy. The Guardian's quite wrong about that, and the Observer's wrong about that, and they really believe that the Cameron government, since they're all obviously Thatcherites, are going gung-ho for nuclear energy. I wish, or at least I wish the nuclear energy bit, not the Thatcherite bit, but they're not. And the reason they're not is that the bourgeoisie in this country, The Economist, for which I used to write, so I know what I'm talking about, has condemned nuclear power in terms that The Guardian would lovey-dovey to bits. And that's very sad. And the only alternative to that, I'm afraid often from the nuclear industry, has just come out from the World Energy Council, and I fear to say it's far too complacent in imagining that life will go on the way it did before Fukushima. And if you look at the press release that they put out just a few days ago, limited impact of Fukushima on the global nuclear outlook. Well, I wish, because right out there, not just in Germany, but in very important places like China, there has been quite a withdrawal from nuclear energy, despite the fact that the East, especially China, is keener on it than most people. Now, why is China keen on nuclear energy and every form of energy? Because there's no silver bullet. It's number one in renewables. It's number one in nuclear build at the moment. Well, if you're building buildings like this that look like a bottle opener in Shanghai, or that one, the same thing, you're lighting up the sky like this, you're turning buildings into cinemas in downtown Pudong. You're making displays like this in Tiananmen Square, so you land, you listen to the Stalinist loudspeakers, because you have to, and then you make these kinds of displays. That's a very big contrast between what happens in the East, the whole pace of construction, motorization, infrastructure development, compared with the feelings of guilt, and discussed in the West for any kind of consumption, not just that of bankers, but also for yours and mine, for Manchester's and London. China is gung-ho to move ahead, so is India, you all know that. The West feels full of self-loathing. And once again, we see that energy is not just about the technicalities, but about how we feel about ourselves. If you believe that man is a plague on the planet, you're not going to trust him to tame the nucleus. If, on the other hand, you think that the dangers fully underlined by Fukushima do not adhere directly to the nucleus, but relate very much to the social system, the economic priorities, and the politics of a society building energy, then you will take a more optimistic view. So I just want to say, look at construction in China and what Hong Kong does. You know, you might think you've got some built-up areas in print works and elsewhere, but this is how Hong Kong goes, and the whole of the East is going to be going like that in the next 20 or 30 years. Now, and that's how they do it at night, not so bad. And you're worried about a third runway at Heathrow, you better start worrying about the 100 new airports that China wants to build between now and 2020. So you add it all up, they've got no choice to build nuclear as well as every other kind of energy, coal, gas when they can, solar and wind. And they're also beginning to overtake Europe in the whole research and development effort across all economic fields, but especially in energy. Not long ago, after the Fukushima event, they said, we're going to hold back a bit from going quite the rate that we were going to go. And that's, for my money, a great mistake on their part, because they themselves admit, I'm sure you all read China daily. I'm sure you believe it as much as I do, but nevertheless, you don't have to be a supporter of the Chinese Communist Party to know that Chinese energy consumption is going to double very fast over the next 8 years. So, in fact, if you look at the numbers for the new build construction of nuclear energy in 2011, you'll see that China, having built 10 in 2010, has built none in the year after Fukushima. So even there, where they're the most gung-ho for it, where they have these big demands for new energy, there's a possibility not just of a nuclear shortfall, but power cuts that wouldn't affect downtown Salford, but millions and millions of people. And yet, the good news is that Jeffrey Immelt, the head of General Electric, determined 2 or 3 years ago that not America, but China was ahead of America in all new energy technologies. That's Immelt, how he feels today. He used to be a happier bunny. So, the fact is, look east, folks. I got 2 more chapters in this talk, but I'll end at the first, just to keep you on tenterhooks. Look east. The big growth in demand, and you know this as well as I do, is out there in China and India and everywhere else. And yet they've adopted some of the scary tactics of the Telegraph, The Economist, and these other people in relation to nuclear power. And it won't be long before they'll be even feeling as guilty as we are about fossil fuels and also the damage to the landscape of wind turbines. And no doubt, there are all the poisons that making solar panels will eventually unleash. But you and I know that we can solve problems through engineering and technology. That, as the Greens acutely observe, creates new problems. On the whole, we solve the new problems as well. We create fire, we get out of the low-carbon cave, thank God. It was low-carbon, but it was a cave. And then we made the fire blanket, the fire extinguisher, the fire hose, the fire truck, and all of the other things. So fire is a problem. It kills people. Nuclear energy could be a problem if we don't approach it with the politics of belief in human ingenuity and belief in ourselves. If, by contrast, we take the British attitude and determine that the fracking that went out near Lancashire in the sea caused a Richter-scale earthquake of 2, then we're forgetting, in the usual myopic English manner, that there are 25 such earthquakes a year caused by natural causes. But we'll single out fracking and any other source of new energy supply as inherently dangerous, because instead we'd rather agree with Gordon Brown that the way forward for Britain is insulation, insulation, insulation. If you think human progress should mean a bit more than felt, And if you think that this man here is a prat, then I urge you to support nuclear energy, to support renewable energy, and when it's done at scale, and when it's got a whole lot of research and development behind it, and also to support fossil fuels, because they're what the world will need, I fear to say, for the next 20 years. That's unavoidable, especially in the East. So that's the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me say how honoured I am to have been invited to take part in this debate on such an important issue, the energy crisis. As I stand here today, I use the term important to mean important to me personally, professionally, important politically and economically, and important at a basic societal level. However, 12 months ago, the energy crisis was not something that played a huge part of my life. I was, of course, aware. Sorry. Oh. Is that better for you? Yeah, okay. I was, of course, aware of the energy crisis. You know, who couldn't be? I knew that burning fossil fuels produced vast amounts of CO2. I knew that needed to be reduced. But in essence, as long as when I came home and I flicked the switch, the lights came on, I was happy, but relatively in the dark about the key issues that were involved in this simple action that was taken for granted in my modern day life. My academic background is in psychology and management, and I've had a varied career working in senior positions within banking and within Greater Manchester Police, doing all kinds of different things from communications training, public perception initiatives, even to working with the New York Police Department, looking at some of the communications issues during September the 11th. Then in May 2011, I was asked to take up a position within an engineering company, primarily a nuclear engineering company, as a head of business development for DBD. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a nuclear scientist, and at the time, the only thing I really knew about nuclear energy was vague, distant memories from 15 years earlier studying for my GCSEs. That coupled with the overload of fact and fiction and opinion and speculation, statistics and comment, and all that raft of information that followed the Fukushima accident in March 2011. I was, and I still am, overwhelmed by the amount of information that's available to the public, which shows nuclear to be safe, to be dangerous, to be necessary, unnecessary, the only solution to the energy crisis, absolutely the worst solution to the energy crisis. Similarly, the information for the other forms of energy and electricity production is equally as confusing and contradictory. It's unhelpful to the average person who has an interest in forming a balanced and considered opinion about the important issue of the energy crisis and the solutions around it. I'm not naive enough to think that there is or there should be one perfect explanation for all of this and one perfect solution. But what I am interested in is a rational and understandable dialogue between the government, the scientists and engineers, and the public. And this needs to be done without diluting the message. It needs to be done without losing the key points in scientific jargon and statistics presented in complicated charts. I've seen quite a few of those in my 12 months in this industry. Our public are lawyers, and they're accountants, and they're pilots. They're people who could add valuable input into this area, but they're people who have no time to study chemistry and physics and statistics just to get to the key points of the issue. We live in a world where we have access 24/7 to information that doesn't actually need any scientific basis to be published. The need for balanced reporting in the media can often give access to so-called experts who propose wildly inaccurate theories based on little evidence, which are then sensationalised by a media driven by an ever-thirsty public willing to soak in sensationalised reports, which fuel their ever-growing sense of panic and fear about our modern world. Some sociologists say that as a society, we worry more than any other society previously, and that we live in a culture of fear. Well, fear can be a constructive emotion. It helps us pay attention to risk and take action where warranted. But unreasonable and disproportionate fear is another matter. It's this growing, unreasonable and disproportionate fear in our modern society that is causing us to make foolish decisions in dealing with the risks that we face every day. The role of government is to take the emotion away and to analyse risks and solutions based on fact. The energy crisis could hurt the world, but fear could destroy it. The government and energy industry professionals do invest time in stakeholder and public engagement. However, this tends to be with those people who live in the vicinity of an existing or proposed new energy plant, be it nuclear or wind farm. There are various educational programmes targeted at school children, such as the STEM Ambassador Programme, the Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics. But for me, this leaves a huge gap of the general public who remain unengaged with the critical challenge that faces our modern society. In the past, energy has relied on resources, whether they are oil or coal or gas or uranium, but these resources are depleting. And so what we need for the energy of the future is less reliance on resource and more reliance on what is abundantly available in our modern society, knowledge. It's been said that the energy crisis is the greatest challenge that has ever faced mankind. Perhaps. But we live in a world where technology is so advanced that we can share information, knowledge, ideas around the globe at the touch of a button. In order to succeed in the challenge, we need a collaborative approach to the solutions, not a competitive, adversarial approach that's traditionally been seen. We need to inspire interest in the public about the issues that the energy crisis presents and make it meaningful for them so that they want to engage in the debate on solutions. And above all else, once the debates are over and once the discussions have been had, we need action. We need real leadership and consistent cross-party decisions being made. We need ambassadors within the energy industry to engage and communicate with the public. And we need scientists and engineers who will collaborate to provide technical solutions, all understanding that no one solution alone can provide the answer and that each solution proposed has its own risks and benefits. I've been fortunate enough over the past 12 months to speak at international conferences about the need to understand what concerns the public about nuclear power and how best to engage with the public on these issues and how the scientists and engineers can help bridge the gap. At the World Science Forum, the key theme was the changing landscape of science, and leading science and technology professionals from all over the world were present. One of the key areas was to promote the interaction between stakeholders of knowledge, including the scientists and including science policy makers and the general public. These are the people who can enjoy the benefits of scientific advancements, whose quality of life can be improved by finding knowledge-based solutions to global challenges and by a spirited interaction with the global scientific community as another guarantee for the future. The need for the public to be engaged in energy issues is clear. Without their support in solutions, investors won't invest, politicians won't back or will remove their support. The scientists and engineers will not see their innovations implemented, and our communities will move one step backwards in the journey of securing a carbon-free world for future generations. So I'm here not as a technical expert, or not as someone with a great knowledge of the energy industry, but with someone with an interest in the psychology of fear and risk, experience in stakeholder management and public engagement, and with a great passion for working with science and technology professionals to bridge that gap that exists between the public and science, helping to secure a bright future for us and the next generations. Thank you.
I'd like to begin with an anecdote from another country. There is a certain chap known in Denmark by the name of Paul Lacour, who happened to be off-grid. And he was a teacher and a physicist and an engineer, running a little country school. And he needed electricity and heat and light for his school. Being an engineer, he was able to design a wind turbine and have it constructed to his own specification, built it himself with all the components supplied, attached to it an electrical generator, direct generator, and in the cellar of the same building put 2 electrolyzers filled with water, whose task was to receive the current from the generators driven by the wind turbines, to split the water into hydrogen and oxygen, keeping them safely separated, and to conduct them by two separate pipes, separate obviously, 300 meters to his twin classrooms over the other side of the road, in the middle of the fields actually. In the classrooms, he had some adapted Bunsen burners, which were adapted in such a way so as to give light more than heat. Therefore, it wasn't electric light, but it was gaseous light, which enabled him to get through the day, especially on winter days, with enough lighting for all these children. So the process was wind, electricity, electrolysis, hydrogen and oxygen separated, taken by separate pipes underground to the classroom. The gas is then reunited in Bunsen burners, giving the service which was needed. In this case, not electricity, but light through heat. This was instituted in 1895. I repeat, 1895. In other words, this technology has been well known for well over a century. And it was supported, we're talking from Manchester here with a strong local authority, it was supported by the local authority of Askau in the central part of Denmark. And it went on for 5 years before funding, an old story in renewable energy, before funding was withdrawn. Of course, at the same time, coal, oil, and gas derived from coal were taking over the market, and there was not much of a chance for hydrogen to take over in the future in the way that we've been talking about, especially hydrogen derived from water. Hydrogen, of course, is not new in other fields. The coal gas, which some of the older people remember here, was derived from heating coal in large plants rather than burning the coal. And the gas given off by the coal, leaving very useful coke by the side, was 50% carbon monoxide, which itself is a fuel as well as a poison, and 50% hydrogen. In other words, we've had hydrogen in our gas pipes in Paris, in Berlin, in London, and in Manchester for 150 years before it was finally stopped, and we moved over to natural gas, CH4, 1 atom of carbon, 4 atoms of hydrogen, which also burns, giving off, when the water burns, dihydrogen oxide, which is water, when the carbon burns, when the hydrogen burns, when the carbon burns, carbon dioxide, which is our big problem. Big problem, you might say. What is this problem? When was it discovered? Well, there are certain key dates going back again to the dear 19th century when so much interesting hands-on science was done. If I go back to 1895, when Paul Lacour had established his hydrogen-powered classroom, there was somebody else in Scandinavia, this time in Sweden, by the name of Svante Arrhenius, somebody James will have heard of because he's been through his science education. Svante Arrhenius at the time was somewhat wounded from a failed marriage and spent a whole year working out why, having been informed an awful lot by a chap called Hogrum on the ice ages of the planet, why these ice ages had taken place. And taking hints from a very great scientist who's not talked about enough in this country, an Anglo-Irishman called John Tyndall, who produced brilliant results in 1861. Again, we're going back a long way for the wisdom which we need. He researched the whole of the Earth's climate as far as he could without the help of satellites, without the help of long-distance travel, and came to the conclusion that rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would augment the absolutely certain global warming effect of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. He couldn't measure exactly how much there was in the atmosphere. That came a little bit later, especially with Dr. Keeling in California and then in Hawaii in the 1950s and 1960s. And it's through the Keeling curve that we now know that this carbon dioxide, and I'm getting onto the energy process in a minute, we now know that carbon dioxide has been going up step by step since round about 1880. And I wonder if you all know, if you are aware of these things. For example, if I ask a group of people what is the exchange rate between the dollar and the pound, most people know roughly. What is the correct temperature of a healthy child? They know roughly 37 degrees centigrade. If I ask them what is the present level of carbon dioxide, which is now governing our lives and is threatening our futures, very few people know. It is 390 parts per million. What should it be? What was it until 1850? It was 280. What was it in the ice ages, which come every 100,000 years? It was 180. So we have a step change, 180, 280, 180, 280 over the past 2 million years, with temperature going up 5 degrees, down 5 degrees, up 5 degrees, down 5 degrees. Now we are as far above the 280 as the ice ages were below. This is obviously dangerous. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is not a research organization, but a gathering organization, which puts together data from research scientists, has produced 4 reports since 1995. The most recent report came out in 2007, the whole lot downloadable for free from the internet, ipcc.ch, they're based in Switzerland. And it is completely certain, there's no doubt about it, that if we double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it's going to happen quite soon if we're not careful, we are going to put all of us in peril. This sounds like alarmist talk. The word alarmist is often used by people who don't want to see any change in our consumption of coal, oil, and gas. I could give you dozens of names of such people. The Global Warming Policy Foundation, for example, in London, who refuse to disclose their funding, will say we no need to worry, carry on as we are. I'd like to go back just 1 minute to, if I have time, to Svante Arrhenius. One of the things which he gained his Nobel Prize for, it was not his researches into climate, it was into the behavior of metals and non-metals in water, into the ionic behavior of elements in water. And he was pretty sure, against the advice of his professors in the 1870s and 1880s, that any element that dissolved in water attracted and created its own electrical charge. If we now go forward now to the last 10 years, what has been alarming people, not in the climate circles, but in ocean circles, has been the very great change in the way the various gases and solids in the ocean are changing their chemistry. And that is because of carbon dioxide, which wouldn't have surprised Svante Arrhenius. What is happening now is that the pH of the ocean, which is a measure of carbon dioxide, has fell from its 8.2 level of 50 years ago to 8.1. That might not sound very much, but that is on a logarithmic scale. It actually means a 30% reduction. It is going towards the acidic level. Number 7 is acidic, is neutral. This is already having serious, measurable, predicted effects on all aspects of ocean life. When you add onto that the heating effect of the atmosphere on water, which is creating stratification, which is changing the movement of phytoplankton and zooplankton up and down, therefore damaging the food web, when you add those things together, we see we are in very serious trouble. Therefore, I would call for an energy solution to be, firstly, zero carbon. And we have to reach that zero carbon by going back to what was first tried out by that very interesting man, Paul Lacour. We have to look at the 2 components, sunlight and water. Remembering also that wind energy is a derived version of sunlight by creating different temperatures, therefore different pressures, therefore creating wind. If we do that, we can move over to what I would call an electro-hydrogen economy. James has talked about scale, quite right. Scale is very, very important. And we've also heard about Jordan and about the Middle East and about North Africa from Lauren. One of the factors, one of the numbers which is necessary to know for us who are concerned about energy is that 1 square kilometre of desert soil receives directly from the sun 1 gigawatt during the daytime. And a gigawatt is the size of 1 large power station. In fact, the whole of the United Kingdom grid operates on 60 gigawatts. There's an amazing solar resource there. So what we need is technology, we need investment, and we need risk-taking, because it's not going to be easy, it's going to be extremely expensive. Nicholas Stern reckoned we could do it. I think we have to go further than Nicholas Stern, partly because we don't have to level off our carbon dioxide emissions. We actually have to do something about the damaging concentrations which are already in the atmosphere. 390. How do we bring down that? We need lots of energy to do that, or we need lots of tree planting, or we need both. What I would say also, although I expect Lauren and James will not be in agreement with this, what we need is to eschew the whole nuclear idea. Not because I happen to dislike the nuclear idea because of long-lived waste and things. That is also true, but it doesn't scale. Nuclear produces electricity. If you look, for example, at this country, nuclear at the moment is producing 18% of our electricity, but our electricity at the plug is only 1/9 of our total energy use. Therefore, nuclear is only producing 3 or 4% of our total energy, because what we need for energy as human beings is not just electricity, crucial though it is. We need heat, and we need process heat, and we need stuff to drive our transport. We need all those things. What we also have to look at is the perils of biofuels, sometimes wrongly called agri-fuels. What we are doing at the moment by very widespread agriculture, which we have to use, we cannot do without it with a population of 7 billion going up to 9 billion, we are changing our land surface drastically. This is one of the things which alarms climate scientists quite a lot, because land surfaces can absorb carbon dioxide, can eject carbon dioxide, can reflect sunlight, can absorb sunlight in ways which have got nothing to do with the natural environment. We have to be very careful, therefore we shouldn't be using any amount of land which we've got in order to create biofuels. The more fundamental reason is that when you have got a biofuel, a log, a bunch of straw, or 1 billion tons of specially dried grass, what you've actually got is sequestered carbon. What is the intelligent thing to do with that sequestered carbon? To burn it and to return the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? What is the point of that? The only sensible thing to do with such carbon is to keep it down, dry it out, sequester it somewhere so that it can, in its solid form, not a gaseous form, it can be done, and in that way we can start looking forward. I think I've had my 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. They were 3 very, very useful, quite divergent views. I've got quite a few questions for the speakers, and I'm sure each speaker has got quite a few questions for the others. But I'd quite like to take any questions or contributions from yourselves at any point, preferably now, and I can ask mine if you haven't got any yourself. Mark is going to bring around a roving microphone. The reason for this is that NLTV, who are filming tonight, are taking a feed off that. And so whilst we can hear each other in the room, for the video afterwards, it'll be better if you speak into the microphone. So, at the front.
Apologies if this has already been covered. You mentioned about carbon in the atmosphere. What do you think of technologies such as air capture and deriving fuel from the atmosphere and reducing carbon too?
Do I need the microphone?
No, your microphone.
Will it work? Okay, good, thank you. Carbon capture, it comes in two forms. And there's a lot of oil company hypocrisy about this. I wonder if you've all heard of the initials EOR. I expect James has, and Lauren probably has as well. They will talk about capturing carbon dioxide from power stations and sequestering it via pipeline.
That's not the question I asked, sorry.
I'm slightly deaf.
Sorry, air capture, as in deriving carbon from the atmosphere.
Perfect. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. Air capture comes in two forms. If I give you a couple of names, you could look them up on the internet. Chemical air capture, using very wide-throated industrial devices, is pursued very, very strongly by two people, David Keith at Calgary University in Canada and Klaus Lachner in Columbia University in the United States. And the American Physical Society reckons it simply cannot be done at any reasonable price at capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, solidifying it, getting rid of it somewhere. I happen to find myself, again, this might be a prejudice, completely against this because it's going to demand an enormous amount of industrial processes, and in the end, what does one do with the carbon dioxide? One puts it underground, and to get back to my mistaken comment, what will the oil companies do with it? The carbon dioxide will be sent down pipelines, and it will not be all sequestered. It will be used to drive out more oil. And that is what they do not tell us in popular newspapers. They say, we are sequestering carbon dioxide, we are saving the climate. They are not doing anything of the sort. They are doing EOR, enhanced oil recovery. And what is even more devastating and hypocritical about this is that oil is used for transport. Therefore, it goes into cars, tractors, lorries, and planes, which are intrinsically incapable of carrying the mechanisms for trapping the carbon dioxide which comes out of the exhaust pipe. A little figure which you should know. The carbon which goes into a petrol tank, say 10 gallons, say 45 litres, is the main constituent of the petrol, much heavier than the hydrogen that goes in there. When it is burned, it comes out nearly 4 times heavier. So if you've got 20 or 30 kilograms of carbon dioxide as fuel, it means you have to go around in the end with 100 or even 150 kilograms of trapped carbon dioxide in the tail end of the car. Impossible. It can't be done. Will the oil companies tell us that? Absolutely no. I don't think I've answered your question enough. Have you got some more to ask me?
You have half. James, do you want to come back on that?
Well, of course, we all hate the oil companies, just like we hate, big Rupert Murdoch, and we hate big pharma, anything that's big, really. We are very hostile to. But if you take one particular effort that Sandia National Laboratories is trying to do, I think you can see that what Micah said isn't really very fair. With the oil companies may be venal, but this is Sandia National Laboratories in the United States, and they're doing exactly what you're kind of recommending, Mike, which is they are pulling the CO2 that Britain made stocks of, not new supplies of with power stations, but big stocks of in the Victorian era. They're pulling it from the air, and they are heating up with solar power rust to a very high temperature in a way that will strip the CO2 of oxygen and leave the carbon on its own. They will then do something similar to some water, strip it of oxygen and get the hydrogen from water. They'll ram the two together, and you will have new hydrocarbons, I think this is what you're getting at, Mark, made from what the Brits did in the Victorian era. So CO2, ladies and gentlemen, is not only a problem, it's also an opportunity. And this has been found in many cases throughout the world. In history, the sea was a barrier to human endeavor until people developed boats, and it became an opportunity. So CO2 is also, I might add, two Nobel Prize-winning chemists have said this, one of the least researched natural molecules that's ever existed. And really no new work on it has been done in the last century. And I think that highlights that before rushing to, in emotive terms, as Lauren I think quite rightly says, to throw mud at Aunt Sally, namely Exxon, and all the people who single-handedly, so we are so often told, have led us into wars. Let's take a balanced view and see that even detritus and waste of the CO2 sort can be recycled, not the way you and I recycle a banana, but something done at an industrial scale. It could make new hydrocarbons. So in this respect, fuel for cars is not limited by the fossils in the earth. It's much more unlimited than we imagine.
Anyone else? Just before you come back.
I go back many, many years, you see. I go back a long way, and I remember the first mine strike when Joe Gormley took over the miners, God bless their little hearts, and we went to Teddy, went on to a 3-day week, which wasn't very successful. People soon got fed up having their lights out half the time. So Ted said, let the country decide. You know, do the miners run the country or does the government? And the people voted to get the light switch back on, and Harold Wilson became our Prime Minister, and people will not stand for anything that destroys their comfort level. And we want to maintain that comfort level and improve that comfort level and give that comfort level to the third world. And that's going to take a vast, vast, vast amount of electricity. And the only way you're going to get that in this secure and safe form is nuclear power.
Strong challenge.
It's a comment to Laurent about fear. And part of my growing up was to discover that I lived in a world where thermonuclear annihilation was actually a distinct probability. That does give you a different sense of anxiety. And the anxiety that thermonuclear weapons engender is not separated from people's perception of nuclear energy. I think it's important that the fear is not irrational. Yeah, right? But it's a really question for James. I think you're a bit unfair to the economist, because they don't say they're anti-nuclear. They actually rather amusingly quote Admiral Rickover's definition of a practical nuclear reactor. Do you remember what he said? Would you like to be reminded? Admiral Rickover, who was responsible for the generation of nuclear plants for submarines, said, on the other hand, a practical reactor can be distinguished by the following characteristics. It is being built now, it is behind schedule, it requires an immense amount of development on apparently trivial items, it is very expensive, it takes a very long time to build because of its engineering development problems, it is large, it is heavy, it is complicated. A practical man's view. But I think the question devolves, because a real question is you, James, which is about forecasting. I sat with a chap in 1968, something like that. I was struggling, or early 70s, struggling to do a doctorate on electricity generation. And he got out of his bottom left-hand drawer, like we all do, a fascinating picture of how you know which particular power plant to build, and where would you build it, and at what scale. He said, if you take the central estimates, you get a simple answer. If you put plus or minus 2% variation on all the estimates over the expected life of 25 to 35 years, you can build any power station you like, anywhere you like, and you would never be able to tell the difference whether you've done it right or wrong. Has that position actually improved very much?
Don't answer that just yet. At the back.
Yeah, my name's Mike Martin. I work at the Tyndall Climate Change Centre. One of the things I'm interested in is the frugalisation, as it's called, of new business models emerging from the developing world. And I just wanted to pick up on what a previous contributor said about everybody wanting in the developing world, energy-intensive facilities. But in fact, if you look at these new business models, they're very frugal, literally, because we're talking about replacement of wood burning in villages in developing countries with solar panels, and the use of the bicycle to place, people walking for miles and miles. And this liberates people to develop their own kind of ways of living, which needn't be as energy intensive. And if we look at Denmark, I'll just finish on this, but in Denmark, 2/3 of all journeys under the distance of 3 kilometres are on bicycles. And in this country, it's only about 7%. And so I think there's a lot we can do to live more frugally, but in a more fulfilled way, if we take lessons from other countries, whether it's Denmark or sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you. Extremely useful contribution that should be looked at. Anyone else? Particularly, I've got a question that you raised, which came up in the discussion in October, and this was all to do with the association of thermonuclear explosions and the nuclear industry. I think in the 60s there was a lot of political campaign work that did associate nuclear weapons with the nuclear industry. The assertion was made, which kind of went unchallenged in October, that association has really disappeared and that there is no real association between weaponry, thermonuclear explosions and the nuclear industry. So it would be useful to have that out, to bring that to the fore a lot more.
Go on, take a look at what you just said, Sam. I've had the situation where I was out in the country where, when the rioting was going on in England in August, and sort of on the outside, seeing what goes on, then coming back home and really finding out what actually did happen. Do you not sort of think that the media, how big a role the media has in sort of really compounding all the problems that everybody has as to which energy source to go to? In other words, are you really looking at, we need to build 50 new power stations of Zenareal, but really you end up fighting with the media who say wind turbines sort of got to turn off when it gets too windy, or nuclear power stations are bad because the water might go up, might not have the Fukushima, various things like that. Do you think it's a more media problem rather than an engineering problem?
Extremely useful question. Any more along those lines? Do you want to come back on this perception issue, because you made a big play of the issue of information overload and a real fear that people have around the technology?
Yeah. To come back on, absolutely, fear of nuclear weapons, not irrational, not, that's out there, and that's something a very valid point. Just having a quick look at the latest Ipsos Mori poll, which I appreciate, I've stood up and said statistics and, throwing charts up. The Ipsos Mori poll asked people who were opposed to nuclear why they were opposed to nuclear, and only 1% were opposed to nuclear because of fear of nuclear weapons. So, very valid point. But actually, what I'm talking about is irrational fear in terms of thinking about safety issues and things that may not be quite as they don't maybe have the information that they need to make those decisions. So that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about there. However, that being said, when I told my mum I was leaving my lovely job in Greater Manchester Police and I was going to join the nuclear industry, she burst into tears because all she could see was the mushroom cloud and me coming home, glowing green. So absolutely. This is the sector of the public that I'm talking about, not the kids at school that get, the STEM training and the educational programs, but those people that don't live near a nuclear power plant, that have never had to engage with it, and all they see are 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and that mushroom cloud. So absolutely, yeah.
Mark?
It's just a question. I like your an analysis really of a well-meaning government and to get communication between the
between the experts and the government and the public, and talking about understanding what a real perceived risk and moving on from there. But I'm just wondering, from the discussion that we had in October in the Manchester Science Festival, there was it seemed to be that the problem isn't with the general public, but with the investment and real motivation and will by the nuclear companies to go and invest and make. They seem to be overawed by sort of caution and restraint, and I'm just wondering whether it's not that we're not accepting, but that they're not putting a big enough case for the advancement of nuclear energy.
I would absolutely agree with that statement. Mike made a point about, I don't know, something around nobody knowing the safe levels of carbon dioxide or how much carbon dioxide, and that they would know how hot or the temperature of a healthy child. Well, the temperature of a healthy child is important to people. The exchange rate is important to people. Obviously, for whatever reason, we haven't done enough in the energy industry to make that an important thing, and that's similar to what you're saying. We can put all kinds of publications out. We can, and we do, as you've said, the media are swamped with various different stories about, the nuclear industry is this or it's that, or there's these statistics or there's those statistics. But if the public aren't engaged, if the public don't want to know, then, putting out all that media is just a waste. So that's the first issue, if the public don't want to know. The second issue is what you're saying, is that you seem to feel a lack of interest from the nuclear companies in wanting to engage in that process.
Not lack of interest, a lack of will. They seem to be very conscious of risk, and there's like fear and restraint, and then also we've got the planning issues of no one wants a nuclear power station on their doorstep, and you've got all this bureaucratic legislation, which is the 1947 Planning Act, which needs to be radically reformed in order to get any real proposals through.
Yeah, I think you'd have to be careful about making the statement that nobody wants a nuclear power plant in the back door, because actually if you do talk to the communities that live around existing power plants, they absolutely want those power plants there. They see power plants like we may see, the coal mining communities. Generations have lived there, so I would be a little bit cautious about sort of making that statement, because there are whole communities that are built around nuclear power plants. I don't see that there's a fear of the nuclear industry in wanting to engage with the public. I do see that there is a kind of a lack of understanding about how best to engage. There is information out there, but is a member of the public really going to trawl through all the information that's there and all the science and all the statistics? It's a question of motivation of the public for me, rather than a fear of engagement from the nuclear industry. But hey,
I'll come to you in a sec, Mike. Do you want to respond to that, and particularly pick up the point that Mike made about the scalability? Because there's a strong challenge that nuclear is not scalable to be able to provide the energy resources that we need. And so it would be useful to analyse that in terms of nuclear, but also then analyse it in terms of scalability of hydrogen, for example, or other renewables. So come back to what's been raised, but if you could touch on
just on the scalability thing, I can't support that. There are modular reactors under development. Reactors, there are about 400 or so is the installed base around the world. So you're looking at, in terms of replacement parts, a mass manufacture kind of thing in terms of the number of pumps you need and all of these things. If you look at the scale of the endeavour, a maximum megawattage capacity, that isn't the megawatt that they actually generate, but the capacity of a wind turbine is 20 megawatts, of a nuclear power plant is 1 or 2 gigawatts. So if anybody's got scale on their side, it's the nuclear industry. I think the more important point was made, I think by you, Lauren, when you said political support is vital for investment backing. And I think that's the point that's being made at the back. For too long, the nuclear industry has been on the back foot, always arguing that it is low on CO2, that it is low on problems of security of supply, that Australia will never be a hostile regime like Iraq or Iran or oil states are. And so that's the reason that we must back nuclear. And this is immediately taking the proposition that a goal in life is to lower one's carbon footprint. If you Google carbon footprint as a phrase, you will find 750,000 entries. So much is the agreement about what a carbon footprint is. If we start from that proposition, then it's very easy to say, well, we don't care that a wind turbine is weak. It's also low CO2, but not as dangerous, although they can be dangerous, as a nuclear power plant. If, by contrast, you start from the perspective I tried to give, which is that the world needs a whole lot more new energy, unless you want people in the third world, like our friend from the Tyndall Centre, to ride around on bikes for the next 100 years. I'm sure that's great, riding from Delhi to Calcutta and places I've been to in India. If you think the world deserves and needs, especially the third world, the highest forms of human civilization, then lower CO2 will come with a new round of investment in nuclear energy, but that isn't the goal that's motivating you. The goal that's motivating you is to provide for the masses in their homes, in their workplaces, on the streets with street light, and all the things that we need. The world needs a lot more energy. That's abundantly clear in Asia. And if we start from that proposition, then the energy density of nuclear fuel is so much higher than anything else that's around, packs so much of a punch, and we haven't yet talked about fusion, even more of a punch, then we can begin to satisfy the world's needs. I think that's the humanistic perspective and the proper one in terms of what people need around the world.
Mike, do you want to come? Just hold your thought for a second. Mike, do you want to come back on the issue of scalability?
As long as this is not fisticuffs with James, I'll say something. The world population is 7 billion at the moment, okay, and it's absolutely sure it's going to be round about 9 billion by 2050, give or take a billion. The electricity installations in this country are round about 1 kilowatt per person. That's only 1/3 of the United States. It's 3 kilowatts per person in the United States, and in Canada, and in Australia. And in fact, all three countries generate most electricity from carbon. James and I would agree that's not a good idea, from coal. That's not a good idea. But suppose instead of going to the extent of the United States or Canada or Australia, we simply do the more modest scale of the United Kingdom and of Ireland of 1 kilowatt per head. That means for the spread of civilization to the third world, I didn't quite appreciate the way James put this, maybe he didn't quite mean that. We're going to have 1 kilowatt per person. That means 9 billion kilowatts of installed power, which is 9 million megawatts, which is 9,000 gigawatts. Can we really construct 9,000 1 gigawatt power stations, run them safely, staff them properly, and put the waste somewhere safely for future generations to pat us on our head, on our tombs, and say, well done, you've given us the most beautiful present possible? It can't be done. It is completely impossible, both intuitively and mathematically, and if you look at all the statistics of supplies, it simply can't be done. If you look at the periodic table of the elements, there are only 5 which really count for our energy supplies. There's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, uranium, and thorium. The uranium and thorium are simply not available in treatable quantities in order to match that 1 kilowatt per head for a population of 9 billion. The carbon is there, but it's dangerous. The carbon with the oxygen giving us carbon dioxide. The hydrogen is there in virtually infinite quantities, but it's locked up in water. And it can be freed by solar energy and by the wind. Hydrogen plus oxygen, when it burns or when it goes through a fuel cell, simply gives us dihydrogen oxide, in other words, which is water, which returns to the atmosphere exactly what it was made of in the first place. In other words, it gives us, at last, the perfect circularity which we need, which we haven't got so far. A lot more to say, but I won't say it.
But do come back later.
I'd just like to pick up on what James was saying about energy density. And actually that is the key issue for us. It's the amount of bang we get for our buck. And nuclear fuel is far and away the most energy dense fuel we have available at the moment. We talked about fusion. I'm old enough to remember Zeta, which was going to be the UK's answer to the energy problem. Didn't work because fusion was a bit more difficult than we thought in the 1960s. So I think we do have to consider energy density as the principal engineering factor that's going to determine how well we close the energy gap. And you can argue all you like for wind energy and the rest of the things, they don't come anywhere near nuclear energy. The second thing I'd like to say is that carbon's a big issue. We should all realise that with every breath we take, we breathe in air with 3 parts per million carbon dioxide. We breathe out air with 4,000 parts per million carbon dioxide. Doesn't that mean that we should all stop living?
Useful contrast.
Chris Williams from the Nuclear Institute. I'd like to surprise you by saying nuclear power is not the answer to the energy crisis. It's part of the solution. What nuclear power in its current form offers us is time. A nuclear reactor, like the ones that we are looking at building in the UK, Generation 3+, it's known technology, it's mature technology, and it slots into our current energy grid. That buys us time to move towards microgeneration, to move towards a hydrogen economy, to move towards using solar power, wind power. That's what it does. It's not the answer to everything, but we can deploy it within a reasonable timescale. We know the risks, which these days are mainly to do with politics and commercial risks, which is why the energy companies are kind of standing off for a couple of years until we sort out energy pricing in the UK, until the planning infrastructure is streamlined, because it's all about commercial now. Back in the early days of the nuclear industry in the UK, it was all run by the government, and it was for the good of the country. We had a closed fuel cycle, we manufactured fuel, we burnt the fuel in the reactors, we reprocessed the fuel, and we were looking at then using that reprocessed uranium and plutonium in reactors in the future. That's all been broken up now because the government sold off our energy industry. So the companies that are going to build nuclear power stations in the UK are owned by the French, the Germans and the Spanish. And they will only invest if the market conditions are right. But really what we're going to look at is what's beyond the next 50, 60 years. And that is where we look at alternative sources of energy, the hydrogen economy, and alternative ways of producing that hydrogen.
Behind you.
Thomas Smith. I've got 2 questions. The first one's to everyone. So who here supports nuclear? Hands up, please. And do any of you know what the half-life of plutonium-239 is? It's 24,000 years. So if you were to meet a human from 24,000 years ago, do you think you'd be able to talk to them? Do you think you'd be able to have a conversation with them? So do you think you'll be able to have a conversation with a human from 24,000 years from now?
I just think that technology develops, the more power we get, the better we get. If we start going backwards, then we're not going to get anywhere anyway.
Don't have a private conversation.
But into the future, right? So if you're producing waste that is dangerous, and its half-life, so that's only half of it to be dissolved in 24,000 years, do you think that you can provide a way to tell our future generations, who don't even speak English, they might not even comprehend what our consciousness is, do you think that we can be able to produce it in a way and keep it safe in a way that they're not going to dig into the earth trying to find something else and find this, waste that completely destroys them and destroys whatever their generally involved genetic makeup is concerned. So I mean, essentially, I think you can't use nuclear because it's just too dangerous.
Thank you. Behind.
There's 2 parts of what's being said here that start to worry me. One of the parts is the assertion that things can't be done, like it's too dangerous. And the other thing that's worrying me is the assertion that China can't be like Britain is today in terms of its power generation. And India can't be like Britain is today because it's somehow impossible. Now, You could have argued 200 years ago that the way we have Britain today wasn't possible. And nobody could conceive how we could get around today. Now, all we have to do is project forward the pace of technological development that we've had to get here and speed it up a bit and address the problems that need addressing, like better and more efficient coal and gas production, better nuclear power, and work a bit more on the idea that was dreamed up by somebody in a school in Denmark. And I can't conceive that we can't solve these problems, because we need to think that people in China need at least as much power as we've got in the UK now, and people in India do as well. And I don't think 100 years' time bicycles are good enough for the people in India. They should have better and more advanced transport. And 24,000 years' time, we would have found a solution to nuclear waste. If we haven't, we really don't have any faith in the ingenuity of humanity to solve these sorts of problems.
Thank you. Down at the front and then at the back.
Hi, I'm Narinder Man. I'm a geography teacher in Chorlton, and I used to work for the nuclear industry. Teach a lot about energy consumption to GCSE students. And they seem to have it quite clear in their head that the only way we're going to solve our problems is by stopping our consumption. Humans need to realise that when the electricity is not there when we turn a switch, that's when we're going to realise stop our consumption. It's not necessarily invent something new. It's not necessarily get more fuel. We need to stop our consumption so we don't need as much fuel in the first place. And I'd hate to say, I think a lot of people in India are quite happily cycling. And I don't really think the Western model is the best way to go. I don't really like having to put petrol in my car. I think the only way we're going to realise that there is an energy crisis is when the gas doesn't come on when we want our heating, when the light switch doesn't get turned on. We need to think how we train each other and everyone around us, and teenagers are very good at this, stop our consumption, reduce our consumption, do the 5 Rs, and that's the only real way humans are going to realise there's a cost for everything that we use and eat, etc., etc.
That's certainly one solution to the energy crisis. At the back.
I'm not a scientist. There's a lot coming back from what you were saying, Mike. Following on from what you last said, I don't know if you remember Fred Astaire's song, "Who's Laughing Now?" Died in Berlin, but it's something that it's the sentiment of that song. I think is probably needs far greater airing. There's a sort of idea that everything was hunky-dory in the world, the natural world, and all that sort of thing, and in the atmosphere, and what have you, before evil man came along, especially the disgusting, evil, polluting-making capitalist bastards of the 19th century, right? It amazes me, actually, I mean, as I'm not a scientist, but it amazes me that this idea that there's 390 parts of carbon in the atmosphere to 1 million, and the differences between 120, that's very small. It's a 70% increase, but it's a 70% increase starting from a very tiny thing in the first place. I go on with what you said, James. I can never see. I can't see where this idea of the carbon footprint and it being a problem has ever arisen from. It never actually made any sense to me. And I think in one sense that's probably why it is that there isn't all that much public discussion over this as well.
Yes, yeah, I'm going to have to come back because, sorry, I was not very precise about what I was trying to say with respect to development in developing countries. Of course, what I was driving at is that it's possible to jump over certain phases. Like, why bother to have a bus powered by diesel when you can have a bus powered by electricity and hydrogen? And I see we have a few examples of those in London and some very low emission ones here. So if you look at the pleasure you can get from cycling in Denmark or Netherlands, where I used to work, you feel better when you arrive at work, having cycled, but you can cycle because it's so safe. And I can't really advocate that people here cycle around Manchester, because it is hazardous, it's full of potholes, and the trains are stopped at the gunnels, as people will know. So if you provide people with alternatives, then they'll find those alternatives and enjoy the cost savings as we drive down costs on public transport versus private transport. So all the solutions are there, and the solutions are there for the developing world as well as the developed world. So I look forward to that.
Thank you.
I'd just like to respond to the comment about reducing consumption. I think while that is really admirable, I think it fails to recognise that Western society, at least, is driven by want and not need. And so I don't think we will ever go back to using only what we need. We will always use what we want. And increasingly that will be the case in the third world. They will want what they see us having. And so their consumption won't be moderated by need, it'll be driven by want, just as theirs is. I'd like to agree with the speaker from the Tyndall Centre. Cycling in Manchester is truly hazardous. I come from New Zealand where I can cycle quite freely and happily, but I'm very reluctant to cycle here, although I do. It is very dangerous. So I don't think cycles are really the answer.
Jetpacks, maybe? Mark, did you want to?
Sorry, it's moved on. The question's moved on a bit since. It's a question to you, really, Lauren. I mean, James did touch on it. It's like whenever you read anything about nuclear power these days, it's like how green it is, how safe it is, how carbon-free it is. What about the vast amounts, ridiculous amounts of energy it gives us? What about what kind of a world? You know, what kind of a world could we live in with souped-up power? That's what, to me, nuclear's unique selling point is. I'm quite alarmed now when it's discussed in terms of parity, where it's like you hear quotes. There's that much information or misinformation bandied about these days. That I don't know. I think the latest one I heard is that the wind power has got parity with nuclear, or something, or offshore would have. But I can't quite see that. If you could elaborate on that, if there's anything to elaborate.
Well, I can't elaborate on the technical comparisons because that's not my area, and all I would be doing is putting out information that's misguided, which is certainly not what I'm going to do. What I can talk to you about is your question about the issue of information and what is out there. What I don't see that I would like to see in the nuclear industry is one place that you can go to where you can find out the answer to your question. So your question around the parity between wind and nuclear, if you're interested in that, where do you go to find out that information without getting lost in all the other things that are going on? Because for me, and it goes back to your question earlier about, the information is there, it's there somewhere, but we need to work together as the public, as the government, as the scientists and the engineers to bring that information together so that people can access it in a meaningful way.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the more central policy questions that you touch. I've just been sort of dreaming in my corner thinking, what's the feedback loop between energy policy and energy consumption behaviour planning and climate behaviour? And I came to the naive conclusion that energy policy is local and climate effects are global. And it's extraordinarily difficult to see where policy could damp that loop or whether policy destabilises it, makes it worse. And I think your central interest about policy and the kind of policy-informed debates, if it's true that our forecasting models are actually so weak and diffuse, and our understanding of technology gains is so weak and diffuse, we don't have a very good way of formulating policy here, do we? And I'd be quite interested to know how you might think we could progress on that.
But don't answer that just yet. Mark, just guy in the hat.
John Beckerson, Curator of Energy at the Museum of Science and Industry. One of the points that you really resonated with me that you made was where can people come to you for information on this point, and one of the things we aspire to is to review our energy story that we're telling at the museum. And so I'm working on sort of early plans for future energy galleries, which look at energy past, present and future, and help people understand how technology has developed to reach the situation we're in today, and some of the scenarios where we might go in the future. So if anyone is an energy professional here and would like to be kept in touch and feed information into this project, then I'd be delighted to talk to them at the coffee break or at the end.
Okay, down at the front.
I'd just like to say one thing. Britain is traditionally a manufacturing country, and the wind energy is a massive opportunity for us, and we should develop wind because, frankly, you need millions and millions of turbines, and these are big, and they're a big manufacturing opportunity for us. And if you don't have a demonstration plant, no one's going to buy off you. So I would support wind in a big way.
There's no one place to go for information. But I think if you work in the nuclear industry and you try to set something like that up, it would obviously be seen by anyone who's sceptical as just a kind of a front for providing biased information. Obviously, Museum of Science and Industry, that sort of thing is a good way, a more kind of neutral way of putting across information. Another thing that occurs to me is Wikipedia. There's a hell of a lot of information on there, very easy for people to search. And if there is some information that you think is useful, you can put it on there. And if someone else thinks it's biased, people will discuss it. People will remove stuff that's biased and so on. And so eventually you come to a kind of a consistent set of information that people can trust.
Mike, do you want to come back? Oh, just before Mike.
Hello, I think I've come to the wrong lecture. This is engineering solutions to the energy crisis, and I haven't heard any solutions yet. I've heard someone talk about the impact on the public of nuclear and their risk perception. I've heard about, again, more nuclear. I would like to hear more about your idea of how to produce electricity or energy. I'd like to know about a lot more. What else is out there? What else can be produced on a large scale, especially in high density energy, like the gentleman was talking about earlier? What else is going on? Because I think there's been a big bias here from the panel, I'm sorry. But I'm interested in local generation, micro generation, what else can be done, and efficient. And I'm interested in efficiency. It's very strange. I haven't actually heard any solutions yet. Sorry.
Mike, do you want to?
Okay, if you want to risk hearing another lecture, I'm sorry, but just looking at the United Kingdom, okay, our area is 250,000 square kilometres. Each square metre, averaging throughout the north of Scotland down to London, receives round about 1,000 kilowatt hours per year of solar energy. That's missing out wind and missing out the surrounding water. In fact, if you look at the 1,000 kilometre square block, which holds the whole of British Isles, including Ireland, there's masses of energy there. If you measure that energy, the mathematics is back of envelope stuff. All that solar energy, missing out all the others, which we receive free of charge from the sun, is 100 times as much as our total energy consumption industrially, whether you measure that by the second or by the year. In other words, if we could take out and use only 1% of that energy, we don't have an energy crisis anymore. We don't have to import anything. When you look further more into Europe, France, which is twice our area and has better solar energy, or the Iberian Peninsula, Spain plus Portugal, with about 60 million people, like France, like us. Put all that together without even going to North Africa. There is more energy than we could possibly use, even if we went to the United States level of per capita energy consumption. How is that energy to be used? The first thing is to trap energy as heat, not as electricity, because that is 3 times as efficient as electrical energy capture using photovoltaic cells. If you look at well-designed solar capture heating water, you can get at least 60% efficiency. You have to have somewhere to put that water. It has to be designed. Industry has to be keyed in for that. There has to be subsidy. There has to be university departments looking at this. There has to be the oil companies to do it. And I'm sorry, James, the oil companies are wicked. They're not doing it. They've got the money to do it, and they refuse to do it.
Are they evil?
Pardon?
They're wicked, but are they evil?
Yes, they are. They've made decisions to deceive us all. If I could talk, for example, to the gentleman at the back there who said only 180 parts per million, that's not very much, what difference could that make? The people who could inform us with very large advertisements in all the papers are the oil companies themselves. Buy this stuff, but look at the dangers and look at what it does. A simple explanation could be done. They will not do it, they will not inform us, just as they will not tell us that the real reason that they go in for carbon capture and storage is simply to extract more oil from under the ground. If I could go a little bit further, if I'm not taking too long, Mr. Chair, I don't know. If we could trap that heat, as has been done in many places, Sweden was doing it 30 years ago. We could do it. The energy, the human energy, the political energy, the institutional energy, the university energy has not been put into it because it's not been coordinated and because the public has not been informed by those people who have the money to inform us, which is the oil companies. We would be much further advanced if we'd had actually all that energy put into it. If you add that heat, if you add electricity, if you add hydrogen derived from water, using that electricity in order to create a fuel, hydrogen is the perfect fuel, apart from some individual dangers. All fuels are dangerous, otherwise they wouldn't be fuels. The danger of hydrogen is different from the danger of natural gas, for example. If you had a release of hydrogen in your kitchen or in this room, it is so buoyant it would go up to the ceiling. A spark in the ceiling would make it explode. We know that. If liquid petroleum gas is released, it sinks down to the floor. If there's a spark at floor level, that would explode. In other words, horses for courses, technologies for materials. We have to look at that kind of thing. If we've got our electricity right, if we've got our hydrogen right, and if we've got our stored heat right, we needn't look at anything else. We needn't look at coal, oil, gas, or uranium, or thorium. It is so obvious. And people have been saying this for many, many years now. Look at the right stuff on the internet and you will find it. World Resource Institute, WRI, for example, or the Rocky Mountain Institute, rmi.org. It's all there. It's in the open. And the United States, which is one of the worst offenders as far as institutional emissions of carbon dioxide is concerned, also has the most marvelous climate scientists, oceanographers, energy people, for example, I think James mentioned at one laboratory on the West Coast, they know exactly what they're doing. They've got lessons to teach us. We should go there.
Something to say on this?
Well, I want to pick up just 2 points that have been made that I think are very characteristic of our times. The one was made that we need to reduce consumption. That was your point. I'm delighted to meet a representative of the coalition government here in your case, because I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about our need to reduce consumption, to be frugal, as our friend from the Tyndall Centre has it, striking a Gandhian note. I notice when I'm on the London Underground, I hope you'll forgive that little giveaway, there's a big poster by the London Underground with Gandhi on it saying there's more to life than, arriving on time. And I think it's very convenient for London Underground for them to, to run that poster, So I just want to say, when we hear about reduced consumption, when we hear about too much greed, it might sound very ethical, I'm sure it is very ethical coming from yourself, but it dovetails all too easily, in my judgment, with what we're being asked to do by the coalition. And this also turns me to our antithetical pro-nuclear friend, to your left, sir. You say that your argument for nuclear power is that it buys us time for microgeneration. Well, we do also know David Cameron's efforts at microgeneration were frustrated when his windmill would have blown off, or not blown off, because there's no air really in London moving around. I think this is exactly, and you'll forgive me, and we can have a beer about it, but it's a back foot argument that you're making, that we are buying time for pie-in-the-sky hydrogen, or microgeneration, equally pie-in-the-sky, and that, all that needs to happen for the moment is we sort out the pricing system, and no doubt you're in favour of a carbon floor, like the coalition. Well, the government's more interested in price signals than it is in railway signals. I think we can definitely say that. And when I hear about buying time, it's not the coalition that comes to mind so much as the European Union, where every new summit, every new firewall, every new bailout is to buy time before a much worse crisis. So I wouldn't make that my argument for nuclear power right now. I would say what people have been saying, and especially our friend from the Antipodes, about the enormous needs of the world and the enormous power that nuclear has at its disposal. That's the proper argument. That's what we've forgotten about. All else will go along with the austerity or the postponement initiatives so favoured by the coalition and by Brussels, respectively.
I know the speakers have just spoke. They're going to come back and sum up in a few minutes. So last chances.
You say hydrogen's pie in the sky, but an interesting statistic is in 2011, the UK spent more on ringtones than they did investing in renewable energies. Which shows you a problem with the mentality of this country. That just because you believe it's pie in the sky is the problem, right? Why not look to renewable energies? Why think that they're rubbish? And on top of that, we know that we're running out of oil. I mean, humans are digging deeper and further. The deep horizon, you were trying to dig into deeper waters. We're destroying parts of Canada, trying to get the new oil sands that are there. In the process, destroying massive amounts of forests, which are one of our main sources of carbon capture. It's kind of ridiculous. So we know we're running out of oil, and we're digging deeper to get it. And you think that nuclear is the best answer, or we're going to have even more waste. And what happens when we run out of nuclear? What happens when we run out of uranium, The only answer is renewables. Energy from the sun, which we usually get enough of. We just need to invest in the technology, which we're not.
At the back first, and then come down.
Just to, sorry, I didn't expect to speak 3 times, and you'll forgive me for that. But you see, the whole point about this government is that they're increasing consumption by putting people out of work. Those people could be insulating houses, they could be improving the roads, they could be doing many things to make our society more efficient. And at the same time, the government are pursuing military adventures, and military adventures are amazingly energy intensive and wasteful of lives, but also wasteful of resources. And my idea of frugalisation is that we all live better, we all live longer, we all consume less, but we're more fulfilled. And it's liberation of humanity we're talking about. And liberation of humanity isn't unemployment. It isn't closing hospitals and care homes for the elderly. This is regression.
Thank you. Down the front. Yeah.
I think the point I was making was not political or anything to do with that. It was just that we all should have a moral obligation to reduce consumption. If we invent new technologies for the future, which is going to solve our energy crisis now, surely we're just encouraging future generations to carry on consuming as much as they do for another energy crisis to happen in 150 years' time, where they'll be thinking, we should have done this, we should have done that. And when it comes to developing countries, no, I don't refer to them as the third world. In fact, most 15-year-olds wouldn't. We should be encouraging developing world countries to be leading the way of how they're doing it. And not teaching them, learn from our mistakes, but why don't you show us the way of how to do it?
Question to you again, Mike. Do you think there's any any connection between, you say the United States is like the worst emitter, the worst polluting, the worst, they use more, they consume more, but they also have the world's best scientists and oceanographers. Don't you think that having more power, more people employed in things, on bigger scale things, rather than Mickey Mouse jobs, microgeneration and making wind turbines or whatever, that would actually free up more time to develop culturally and levels of inquiry? I'd like a bit more time.
Any final last questions, comments? No? Go on.
Hi, I'm just a complete ordinary person, but really interested in how we achieve some solutions to the problems that I understand in a really basic way, but slightly better perhaps now after this evening, the reading that you gave us to do. And I guess I just wanted to, sorry, I'm trying to get my thoughts together, but we've heard some solutions and a real push for nuclear solution, and we've heard some other ideas as well, which sound really positive. We've also heard that it's really difficult to actually get a basic understanding amongst the population about the problem that there is and that we even need to see a solution. And then we've heard about real difficulties in how you actually motivate our leaders to lead us, and I'm just wondering if in your summaries you might be able to help me to go away with an idea of how I could, what I could do from my very ordinary position to support the processes that we must need to go through in order to solve this difficulty. Sorry.
Any other last final comments? At the back, in the middle, Mark?
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed probably over the last 20 years is the incredible leaps in communication in particular and technology, more so than the other 34 years of my life. I mean, one of the things I noticed right at the start of this meeting was how Mike was saying something about if you look on the internet, and James was looking on the internet. I don't know if you're looking for the same thing, but I just think back to what seems to me a very short period of time when that just wouldn't have happened at a meeting. So I think that couldn't have happened. I think one of the things that I think is it brings home is that people talk about meeting needs. I think that we've reached a stage now where we don't have to, where there is already the ability to meet want. And I don't think we should be ashamed about actually saying we demand what we want, not what we, more than we need. I don't think there should be any sort of embarrassment about that. And I think the fact that we have reached that stage in human development is something to be celebrated, just as much as I think that the 7 billion people in the world and 9 billion hopefully soon is also something to be celebrated.
Thank you for that last short comment. Any other last short comments? No. Right, so to sum up, do you want to go for it, Mike?
Oh dear.
Or final comments, rather.
I'm going to reiterate. I better be brief. If I could just go to the gentleman at the back. Sorry, I'm aiming at you. Excuse me about that. Okay. You're talking about the very small quantities, apparently, of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. If you look at the atmosphere and the Earth as a system, which is extremely complex, you would expect some components of it to have to be very bulky to have an effect, others to be very minute to have an effect. Look at the human body. We have large amounts of carbon and calcium and stuff inside us. But we also have in our blood system very small amounts of carbon monoxide and very small amounts of nitric oxide. If those amounts are increased by a very small amount indeed, we die. In other words, very small amounts of specific quantities can have an enormous effect on a very big organism, whether the organism is the human body or whether the organism is planet Earth. If you look at the very basic textbook, for example, on the greenhouse effect, we know that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which at its lowest level is only, as you say, only 180 parts per million, stops the Earth from being a frozen ball of water. Just that very small amount is enough to create enough heat to keep the Earth basically livable. In the ice ages, there was still life going. With an extra amount of carbon dioxide, only the 280 parts per million, it gives us the climate which we had until 1850. Now with 390 parts per million, together with extra heating effects from the other greenhouse gases which we are producing, and this is nothing to do with nuclear power, I'm laying off nuclear for the moment, nitrous oxide from our agriculture, methane, which is natural gas from leakages from the guts of cows and from rice paddies, and ground level ozone, which is also produced by our chemical industries, etc. We are already not at 390 parts per million, we are at 450 or 460. In other words, we have almost double the level of carbon dioxide equivalent to the ice ages. We can expect nothing but trouble. It is absolutely basic physics and chemistry. It is absolutely certain to come. Now, we are, our industry, ourselves, our families, our housing, we are the children of the planet. If the planet doesn't work, well, we've had it. Therefore, the energy system itself must be in harmony with the planet which we live on. That energy system therefore demands, firstly, that we pull down, that we retrieve that extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which probably can only be done by growing an enormous amount of plant life, which then has to be cut and dried and sequestered. On top of that, we've got to stop overloading the atmosphere by not putting in any more carbon dioxide, by cutting fossil fuel use down to zero, which means instead we have to have something else. As I was saying about nuclear power being as polite as possible, nuclear power can give us, if we want it, some people in this room do want it, some electricity. It cannot give us the enormous amount of heat and of fuel which we need. Fuel being that chemical which combines with atmospheric oxygen to give us heat, which is what we need. If, for example, you look at a town like Glasgow or Oslo or Toronto in the north, on a cold, windless night, where there's no natural energy flow whatsoever, and if we don't have carbon in fossil fuels, and if we don't have nuclear power, we have to have something. And that something can only be hydrogen, which has been created beforehand using solar energy or using wind and storing it, exactly like Paul Lacour did 120 years ago.
Thank you. Lauren?
Okay, I just want to pick up again on this issue of information that's kind of been a theme throughout. It saddened me a little bit when the gentleman there said, you know, we could set up, the nuclear industry could have this website set up with, you know, information, but people wouldn't trust it. And yeah, you're right, they wouldn't trust it, but that does sadden me. But actually, I'm not talking about flying the flag for the nuclear industry in terms of information. I'm talking about if the government are serious in this country about getting people involved in the various different solutions, like this lady says over here, we're focused on nuclear, but if the government are serious about getting us all involved in what solutions are out there, what the costs are, what the risks are, then that should be something driven by them, not the nuclear industry. I agree, but certainly, you know, that's something that the government should be looking at. The government are currently running a select committee. The House of Commons, Science and Technology are running a risk perception in energy infrastructure committee, which again is mainly nuclear when you look at the responses, but it's open to all sorts of energy. It's open to anyone, members of the public, whoever want to input into. I think there's 5 questions that they ask about risk perception in energy. I actually met with the chair of this committee because I wanted to know what then. So when they've collated all these answers, what then? Because, you know, again, if it goes back to, well, we have all the answers and this is what the public think, well, that's fine. But what the public need are information about where to go next. You know, what can I do? What can I do differently than we've done before? So, yeah, I'm still not sold on the idea of people going onto Wikipedia and searching around. And even yourself, Mike, when people were asking questions, you said, you know, you can find it on the internet. Yes, but where do I go to find, you know, this balanced approach? So that's the bit about information for me. A couple of other things that we didn't really get a chance to touch on, and they are nuclear related, but they are other solutions. So the gentleman sat just there was talking about all this waste that's sat from the reactors, legacy waste we call it in the industry. There's a company called GE Hitachi, and they have developed a reactor that's called a PRISM reactor. And it's an integral fast reactor, which basically means that it will burn the plutonium that's sat up at Sellafield. And they have offered the UK government that they can build this reactor. They can build it within 5 years to burn the plutonium that's currently stored at Sellafield. And if it doesn't work, the UK government won't have to pay anything towards it. And that's currently in consideration. So I would ask you to consider, are you anti-nuclear, because that is certainly a nuclear solution, or are you pro-green, because that is getting rid of some of the issues? So I would ask you, not you, I would ask you as an audience to consider that issue. And the other thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about, part of my approach to moving energy forward is that not only do we need to involve the public more, but we need to involve collaboration more. And it does seem very much, you're in this corner and you're in this corner. The one thing that I've seen, collaboration, is in the International Thermoelectronic Nuclear Reactor. It's called ITER. And this is going to be based in the south of France, in Cadarache, and it's 7 nations who are working towards bringing fusion energy, which is nuclear, but it's not fission, it's fusion, bringing that towards producing electricity. Now, it's always 30 years away or 50 years away, as we've said, but this is a collaborative approach to the solution, or a solution, for energy production in the future. So my final point would be that debates like this are fantastic, and it's great to have all these opinions, but actually the success of a debate like this is in what happens afterwards. So what's going to be different? What's going to change? And I like the lady's point, what do I do? I'm here, you've sold it to me, I want to make a difference, what do I do? And the answer is, at the minute, we don't know, we don't have the answer. But that's what we're working on. So my sort of challenge to you is what's going to be different from the debate? What's going to change? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. James?
Well, like Lauren, I think the question you asked is very fair. And like Lauren, I think the answer is what we can properly demand, what you can properly demand, is action and consistent leadership, not further drift from political parties and politicians. Otherwise, we are sleepwalking towards power cuts. Now, I think you've done very well coming here, doing the reading, and participating. And I think the more pressure you can put on our MPs who have these wonderful financial services backgrounds, or think tank backgrounds, or policy wonking background, and no background in the real world of energy supply or energy shortage, in putting pressure on them. And that was the emphasis in the book. It wasn't about energy or carbon dioxide. It was about energizing people like yourself to go and put a lot of energy and heat, quite rightly, as you say, Mike, on politicians to demand the clarity and the firmness of vision and action that I think we're agreed on. I wondered if I could just answer some of the other points with a bit of fun, if it'll just do it. Just wait a second. Very good of you, Mike. Let's see if we can get it right. The first question that was asked by our friend who's now gone, I haven't even answered. And I know I anger people, but this is ridiculous. But if you look at most people who have a go at the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, say it's all, funded by all sorts of naughty people and so on. The real defect as a forecaster, I was going to say, is if you look at how they predict the future, it's got very little in common with natural science. Right? It has plenty of economics. You're a fan of the IPCC. I must say, I'm as much a fan of it as I am the Independent Police Complaints Commission. But anyway, if you look at their scenarios for the future, it's eclectic at best. It certainly isn't all about natural science. And if they think the world economy can be defined by convergent storyline B1 for the year 2100, this is not very convincing. Here's another forecaster, who I'm sure you know, William Stanley Jevons, he wrote about peak coal in the 19th century. He was wrong about peak coal, but he was right to say that as you insulate more around the world, you will probably consume more energy. And that's a paradox that he outlined then, I think is very valid now. If you insulate your home, labor intensively, disruptively, very costly, usually by ex-convicts, if the American experience is to be followed, you will find that generally you insulate it, and then the money that you save, you take on a nice flight somewhere or some other expenditure of energy. We are not going to lower energy demand like you would like. We might like it, it's not going to happen. So I think that's important. Now, we need also not to be alarmed, because I think it is alarmist to go on about peak coal or some of the other peaks. Now, you talked about this young man. Do you know who this man is? He's the father of the theory of peak oil, now you'll know. He's Marion King Hubbard. And the fact that he had a haircut like that shows he was definitely in the 50s. He still has many followers. But what's remarkable is now we face this thing with Western capitalism where we're supposed to be facing peak car, peak Facebook usage in the UK and US, peak everything according to our Californian Greens, and of course peak population. I was glad that Mike didn't make too much of that, because I think it's a very dangerous path to tread. So I think what's underneath all of this sort of peak everything thing is what I try to begin by saying is, do we think we're any good as human beings? Have we this sort of Promethean desire to see a limit and therefore to break through it? Or must we constrain our consumption, our imagination, our ambition, and so on? And I'm very much for, you know, pushing the envelope. And I think Lauren is, and sometimes Mike is. And I do think we've had a reasonable dialogue on some of the techniques. We've talked insulation. I talked geothermal, which I think has immense potential, although no doubt people will find all sorts of alarmist dangers in the culture of fear that Lauren so rightly mentioned about geothermal, but there's a lot going for it. I think what we also heard, well, not enough about, but our friend from Tyndall talking about business models in the third world, or business models, muddles, I call them. Well, there's a great amount of interest in the financialization, not just of the banks, but of energy companies, right? When you phone an energy company, what you hear is a large call center making a lot of noise, trying to get people to switch from one account to another. And then they send you these bills. Well, I've got a physics degree. If anybody can follow this, they're doing really well. And it really shows a system of priorities where it's not only the banks that are financial, it's the energy companies and the mobile companies, nearly every company in the West. You make more money by fiddling the numbers than you do by actually making new energy. And what I want to say just to end is that there is no silver bullet. Right? We're all agreed we need all kinds of different forms of energy to do things. But I must differ with Lauren a little bit in the sense that I do think the arguments by the nuclear industry are not strong enough, and it's not a question of just having the right source or the number one website, or I'm not being fair, but I think we're too influenced by the view promulgated first by McLuhan that the media are all powerful, and that if we just get that communication strategy right and involve those stakeholders, it will be right. Where I think Lauren's much more accurate is to say that government has a responsibility to lead. It might not, all these civil servants and government might not pick the right technology, but they do have the responsibility to raise the level of debate, not just leave it to the Manchester Salon and its commendable efforts. The focus of the nuclear industry on communication is all very well. If you look at the energy industry generally, if you look at these R&D intensities, how much they are spending of their turnover on research and development, right? E.ON, 0.1%. Right? So for every $1,000 they earn, they're spending $1 on researching the future. Right? Centrica, 0.1%. Well, those are utilities. But BP, the picture is very hardly different at all, 0.2%. National Grid, British Gas, really appalling figures here. Now, we understand if we're going to do some forecasting, just because you double your research expenditure, it doesn't guarantee, double the energy output as Einstein rightly said, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research. But if you carry on at 0.1%, I'll make you an incontrovertible forecast, which is you'll get nowhere fast if you carry on like that for the next 30 years. That is the message of big potatoes, which is discounted to £5 tonight at the back of the hall. I think the most important thing when we feel the need to press against limits and exceed them is we should never limit debate. And that's what's been great to have Mike here and the great initiative by the Salon with all points of view discussed. We didn't do dams, but next time and all of that. This is the guy in many ways who founded alternating current. And many Greens will have you believe that the science of global warming is all fixed. It's all done now. There's a consensus. That's the end of it. No more debate. I think the inventor of alternating current, who happened to be a 4'6" Silesian hunchback Marxist dwarf, was actually much better as somebody to go by. We can't afford to stop asking the questions, particularly asking questions of government, and we can't afford not to have strong and passionate debates like this because the stakes are pretty high. All around the world, people will need more energy. All around the world, we need more research about it. And we do need better forecasting. We do need a better communication strategy. Above all, we need to elect politicians who will lead and raise the level of debate. And I think we've made a start here tonight.
Just before we thank our speakers, I would just like to apologise for overrunning a little bit, but I think it's been worth it. And particularly as a second attempt to try and understand the issue of nuclear energy and the political problems involved in that. I think I'd like to do another discussion like this in the Manchester Science Festival in October, but I'm not quite sure about the focus of it. So as you think through the discussion tonight, do get back to me and point out what was really missing in this discussion or where it lacked completion, because I would like to revisit this. But can I thank the speakers and thank yourself for a great discussion.